My devotional this morning is we proclaim because everyone needs to know. You know, when I was a child, I loved reading fairy stories. You know, and having them read to me. And even now as an adult, I love to watch the Disney movie with my daughter. You know, the Grimm's fairy tale version of the Disney version of the Grimm's fairy tale. And as you know, fairy tales, they have certain elements. You know, they have things that make them fairy tales. For instance, they're always presented like a long time ago. So they always start something like once upon a time. And many fairy tales have a hero and a villain. And there's usually magical or supernatural elements to fairy tales. And there's usually a problem that needs to be solved. And the whole story kind of revolves around that problem. And once the problem is solved, they all live happily ever after. You know, but there's another element in many fairy tales that I'd like to point out. You know, it usually features like a castle. It's, you know, like a royal setting. There are castles and there's a queen and a king. You know, and sometimes the heroine is a princess who's in trouble and she needs to be rescued. But the problem is that usually what happens to her is some evil person, a witch or someone, has cast this spell on her. And she's powerless to break free from it. And usually the only way the princess can be freed from the spell is from true love from the prince. And when the prince rescues her, they live happily ever after. You know, for instance, in the case of Sleeping Beauty, my daughter just performed in that in her musical theater. She was one of the good fairies. Okay. You know, an evil fairy curse on Sleeping Beauty was that one day on her 16th birthday, she would prick her finger on the spindle and die. And the curse was partially reversed. So what it was, instead of dying, she fell into a death-like sleep. And she could only be rescued from this state by true love's kiss from a prince. Well, you know, we've all really been like that princess in distress and need to be rescued. Need to be freed. You know, humanity as a whole is under a spell, if you will, of sin. You know, and Paul gives us a list in Galatians 5 of the sinful nature. He said sexual immorality, impurity, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, faction, envy, drunkenness, and on and on. And these sinful traits, you know, they come naturally to humans. And so we're all born under the sway of the evil one. And we know who the evil one is. It's Satan, the devil. You know, and we're held captive. We're held captive by sin and death. And without someone to rescue us, we're powerless. We're powerless to do anything about this spell, captivity. You know, in Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And it says in Romans 6:23 that the wages of sin is death. So without someone to free us, humanity is condemned to death. But you know, it's not all doom and gloom, because God made a way. He made a way to set us free. He sent us a prince, the Prince of Peace, his only son, Jesus. He sent him to die for us. And in Romans 5:6-8 is where the focus is today. Romans 5:6-8 says in verse 6, you see, at just the right time, when we were all still powerless, Christ died from the fear of God. It says that very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person. Though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were still sinners. You see, God's love is so great. John 3:16, God so loved the world. And he demonstrated this by sending Jesus to die while we were still enslaved in sin and in death. You see, his love is an elevated love. He died when we were still killing him, while we were ungodly. We were killing him on the cross. We were his enemies. And his love for us caused his death. But his death nullified the curse that sin placed on us. Because he became a curse for us. He took that sin. You see, God demonstrated his love for us in that he forgave us. He gave us while we were crucifying him on the cross. He said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. You see, his love for us caused him to shed his blood for us. And that blood washes us clean from our sins. So we are no longer enslaved to sin. We no longer have to be under the sway of sin. You see, he demonstrated his love in that he did not just free us from death, but he transferred his righteousness to us. You know, but with all this amazing love that God has demonstrated, there's just one thing that we need to do. We have to accept that love. We have to accept the sacrifice. And we have to stop living the way of sin and death. But there is a major problem. There is a major problem that comes into view. You see, because the majority of the world is unaware that they have a loving Savior. A Savior who is life. They don't even realize that they've been freed from the curse of death. But rather they continue to live under the sway of the evil one. They continue in like a spiritual sleep. You know, some of you may be familiar with the Decision magazine. It's a magazine that's published by the Billy Graham Evangelical Association. And the January issue, it features a topic titled A Culture of Death. You know, and there are several articles. There are several articles included. And they speak about how we now live in a culture of death. You know, and one of the articles discusses how Hollywood churns out so many TV programs featuring programs preoccupied with death scenes and motifs. You know, and these programs, they have a tremendous following. You know, there are about half a dozen, the article says there are half a dozen primetime shows that are filled with death themes. You know, then there are video games like Mortal Kombat, where the death is the theme. You know, another one of the articles, it focused on how the subject of euthanasia and you know, the death with dignity movement, how it's really picking up steam politically. And I don't know if you remember the story of Brittany Maynard. You know, last year, she actually had brain cancer, and she suffered as a result of it. She would have these seizures, and it was, you know, a strain on her, both physically and emotionally. And so eventually she took Life Matters into her hand, and she decided that she was going to end her life. And she, with the help of a physician, she committed suicide 3 weeks before her 30th birthday. And this was all legal and possible because Oregon has become the first state to legalize doctor-assisted suicide in 2008. You know, and going back to the magazine again, another article talks about a religion of death and violence. And that was addressing the Islamic religion, where the radical followers, you know, they fight, they kill and behead and destroy and crucify those who do not follow them. I mean, you all know what happened this week in France, so I don't need to say much about that. You know, and of course we do have the abortion issue, the death of the innocent, helpless babies in the womb. You know, since Roe versus Wade in 1973, more than 56 million babies in America have died, and 1.2 million continue to die every year. We definitely live in a culture of death. But you know, when we live in a world in which many people do not know the love of God, or they have not heard, or they are indifferent to Jesus and his love, we breed a culture of sin and death. You know, and that is because the current prince of this world, the prince of evil, he is death and destruction. And he brings with him death and destruction. And he brings to the subjects of this world death and destruction. So why do we proclaim the love of God? People need to know. They need to know that we have a loving God who came to give life. He came to give us life. And he came to free us from sin and death. So instead of fixating on death, they need to come into a relationship with the God of love and have life, not destroy it. So why do we proclaim the love of God? People need to know the good news that they have passed from death to life. And they need to receive and accept it. You know, but we are to proclaim the love of God not only to those who don't know, but even Christians. Even Christians. We can't forget them because, you know, even in our churches, we need to have a better knowledge of the love of God. You see, because many Christians think that we are saved from sin and death because of what we do or how well we keep the law. You know, some people think that salvation comes from obeying the Ten Commandments. Some religious people have all kinds of different do's and don'ts as to what will save them or what will make them righteous. But the reality is, the law does not save us. Instead, the law condemns us. You know, we're all under the curse of the law, as I mentioned earlier. And it is Jesus who loved us, and he became a curse for us that frees us from the curse of the law. We are free from sin and death, not because of anything we do, but because of the faith and the trust in Jesus and what he has already done. So why do we proclaim the love of God? People need to know so that they can receive and accept his forgiveness. They can receive and accept his sacrifice, his righteousness, and that we can be free from the spell of sin. We can be free from death and destruction and from working for salvation that he's already obtained for us. You know, God demonstrated his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for all. Our Prince has already given humanity, the whole world, his kiss of life, which is motivated by his love. And he wants all people to know so that they can be awakened out of their spiritual sleep of death. So we need to proclaim that love so that all can know. Amen?